I could feel the tightness in my throat before I even fully realized what was happening. My vision blurred, and the dizziness started creeping in. I reached for my phone, fingers shaking. I couldn't talk. I just typed, "Oh, I love it," and hit send. The words, the moment, all of it was too much. I couldn't breathe. I could hardly focus on anything other than the gnawing panic that was taking over my body. The phone buzzed, but I couldn't make myself open the message. I already knew who it was. Lisa. Her text came through right after mine, but I couldn't answer. My chest felt like it was closing in. I tried to stay calm, to breathe through the panic. I was clutching my throat now, forcing every breath. I could feel the swelling, feel it in my lungs and my chest. This wasn't anxiety. This was the real thing. But still there she was, in the background of everything, calm as could be. Lisa, my fiancée, stood across the kitchen. She was scrolling through her phone, not even looking at me. I remember that moment like it was yesterday. How she tilted her head at me, her voice soft. "What's wrong?" she asked. Her eyes flickered over to me briefly. She didn't seem concerned at all. Something in me snapped then. Could barely get a word out, but I managed, my voice a rasp. "Something's wrong with the food." She raised an eyebrow, not an ounce of urgency in her. "Is it?" she asked, almost bored. "Or are you just being dramatic again?" The words felt like a slap. Dramatic. Ankrog was closing. My tongue felt thick. Every breath was a struggle, but Lisa wasn't concerned. She wasn't looking at me the way you look at someone in danger. She was almost amused. Watching me struggle. Smiling like it was a joke. I grabbed my EpiPen from the kitchen counter, shaking so badly that I could barely get the cap off. I pushed the needle into my thigh, praying it would work fast enough, but I knew it wouldn't be instant. It would take time. I needed a hospital. I needed help. My throat was still closing. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. "Are you really going to use that?" she asked, still in that calm, mocking tone. "Over spaghetti." The words didn't even make sense. I couldn't breathe, but here she was, questioning me over my life, threatening condition like it was some petty argument. I pulled out my phone again. With my hands shaking, I dialed 991. My throat barely allowed me to speak, but I managed to get out the words, "anaphylaxis," before I almost collapsed. I barely stayed conscious as I staggered to the door, trying to open it. Lisa's voice called out again, this time a little louder, more desperate. "What are you doing? You're calling 911. Are you serious right now?" She was still in denial, still not understanding the gravity of the situation. Still minimizing everything. Still treating me like I was exaggerating, like I was making it up. The sirens outside were loud now, and I knew help was coming. But I also knew deep down that this moment was something I couldn't take back. It wasn't just an allergy anymore. This was deliberate. I wasn't imagining it. She knew what she did. She knew what I could lose. Paramedics arrived moments later. They rushed in, and I pointed to the food sample on the counter, barely able to speak. "She poisoned it," I whispered. "Peanuts. I'm allergic." One of them nodded, the seriousness of the situation hitting him. "We've got it," he said. "We're taking it." The other began to check my vitals. Lisa stood there, still in disbelief. "This is insane," she said, pacing back and forth. "You're fine. You're just overreacting." But they weren't buying it. They were focused on me now. I focused on the facts. I was the one who had been poisoned. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining this. This wasn't just some food disagreement gone wrong. This was real. The paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher, and I saw Liz's face change. Her expression faltered for just a second, and that was enough for me to know that she knew. She knew exactly what she had done. The ambulance doors shut behind me, cutting her off from my view, but I could still hear her shouting through the glass, insisting that everything was fine, that this was all some big misunderstanding. But I knew better. I knew exactly what had just happened, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The air was a blur. I was hooked up to an oxygen mask strapped to my face, and my body felt heavy, detached, as the adrenaline faded. The paramedics were doing their job, but my mind was still spinning. I kept playing the moment when I realized what had happened, when I understood that Lisa had deliberately poisoned me. I wasn't imagining it. She had done it. She had crossed a line I never thought she would. I barely noticed the nurse taking my blood pressure, her gentle voice asking questions, trying to keep me alert, keep me focused. But all I could hear was the memory of her voice. Calm and cold, "You're fine." I just being dramatic. I was still shaking, still fighting to stay conscious, but my thoughts kept going back to the same question. Why? Why would she do this? What had changed? It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were supposed to be getting married in a few months. We were supposed to be planning our future together, not this. Lisa had always been a bit dismissive, sure. There were the little things, the comments about my allergy, the way she'd roll her eyes when I asked about peanuts at restaurants. But this was different. This was intentional. She knew the stakes. She knew how dangerous my allergy was. Yet she still did it. She put peanuts in my food. She tried to kill me. The door to the room opened, and a police officer stepped inside. Her uniform was tight and formal, but her eyes softened when she saw me. She asked me to confirm who I was, if I was feeling okay to speak, and I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I could. My chest felt tight, and my throat still felt raw, but the worst of it seemed to be over. "We're going to need your full statement," the officer said, her voice firm but compassionate. "Do you feel up to that?" I swallowed hard, trying to clear the dry feeling in my throat. I nodded again. "Yeah, I can." "And do that." She took out a notebook, flipping it open to a fresh page. "Tell me what happened. From the beginning." I took a deep breath, my mind already jumping back to the moments before everything went wrong, the moments before I realized my life was in danger, before I knew what Lisa had done. "We were at home," I began, my voice still rough. "She made spaghetti for dinner. I've eaten it 100 times before. I trusted her, I thought it was safe. And didn't think anything would go wrong." I stopped for a moment, feeling the weight of the words. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let things get this far? "She put peanuts in the sauce," I continued, my voice steadier now. "She did it on purpose. I could tell. She didn't even care when I asked her what was in it. She knew, and when I started reacting, she didn't even seem worried. She laughed at me. Like it was funny." I paused again, unable to stop the rush of emotions, anger, fear. They all hit me at once, and I had to swallow hard to push them back down. The officer didn't interrupt. She just nodded, taking everything in. "I used my EpiPen," I went on. "But it wasn't enough. I needed to get to the hospital. I called 911. She didn't even care. She just kept saying I was being dramatic. She thought it was funny." The officer wrote everything down in her notebook, her pen moving quickly across the paper. "Did she admit to what she did?" she asked, glancing up at me. I shook my head. "Not until the paramedics arrived. She tried to act like nothing was wrong. Like it was all in my head. But when I showed them the food, when I told them what happened, she couldn't lie anymore." The officer's gaze hardened, and she nodded. "I'm going to need you to give us the food sample. We'll have it tested. We can't let her get away with this." I pointed weakly to the bag next to my bed, where the paramedics had put the container with the spaghetti. "It's all there." The officer glanced at the bag, and then back at me, her expression grim. "We'll take care of it. Don't worry." She stood up, and just before she left the room, she turned back to me. "I'm sorry this happened to you. You're doing the right thing by pressing charges. We'll make sure she doesn't get away with this." I watched her leave, my heart still racing, but a small part of me felt a little less afraid, a little less alone. The truth was out now. Lisa couldn't lie her way out of this. She couldn't hide behind her excuses anymore. I was going to make sure she faced the consequences. I couldn't stop shaking. My body was still running on adrenaline, but the worst was over. And doctors had stabilized me. And now they were monitoring me. But it didn't matter. The words kept playing in my head. "I put peanuts in your dinner to prove you're faking your allergy. You're just picky." I was still trying to process it. I mean, how could she do this? How could Lisa, the woman I was about to marry, put my life in danger just to prove a point? What the hell had happened to us? I kept replaying the scene in my mind, over and over again. How she hadn't even cared. How, when I started reacting, she just smiled. It wasn't a joke to me. It wasn't funny. But to her, I guess it was. To her, this whole thing had become some game. I couldn't believe it. A few minutes later, the officer returned, holding the food sample from the paramedics. She placed the bag on the table next to me, and for a moment, I just stared at it. The same spaghetti I had eaten for years, only this time, it almost killed me. I could still taste it, like it was stuck in my throat, a bitter reminder of the betrayal. The officer asked me some more questions, but I could hardly concentrate. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. My chest still ached. Every breath was a little harder than it should be. But the thing that kept me grounded, the thing that kept me from losing it entirely, was knowing that this wasn't just some accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Lisa had done this on purpose. It didn't take long for the police to start investigating. They asked me to give a statement, and I didn't hesitate. I told them everything, how Lisa had downplayed my allergy for months, how she'd mocked me, how she'd ignored every warning I'd given her. I couldn't hold back anymore. I had to tell them the truth. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much she'd crossed the line. I told them about the dinner at her parents' house. About the time she laughed at me when I asked if the food had peanuts in it. About how her friends had made fun of me for being high maintenance just because I didn't want to die. I told them everything. Want to feel the weight of their eyes on me. The officer's careful scrutiny. But it was nothing compared to the way Lisa had looked at me when I begged her to take me seriously. Nothing compared to the coldness in her eyes when she watched me gasping for air. After I finished my statement, the officer left to talk to the paramedics and collect more evidence. I was left alone in the sterile white room with my thoughts. With the deafening silence that came with the realization of how much my life had just changed. I kept thinking about the wedding. When already sent out the save the dates. The deposits were paid. Everything had been set in motion. But none of that mattered anymore. How could I marry her? How could I trust her again after what she'd done to me? How could I possibly walk down the aisle knowing that she had tried to kill me? And didn't have the answer. I just knew that the woman I thought I was going to marry was no longer the woman I saw in front of me. Lisa wasn't who I thought she was. She wasn't the loving fiancée, the caring partner who would stand by me no matter what. She was someone else entirely, someone capable of hurting me, even to the point of death. I could hear my phone buzzing, but I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to hear her excuses. Not now. I knew she would try to call, try to smooth things over like nothing had happened. But I couldn't let it go. Not this time. A few hours passed, and eventually my brother arrived. He walked into the room, looking around with a worried expression before his eyes settled on me. Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. It was the kind of hug I didn't know I needed, but I clung to it. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to just hold me until that moment. He pulled back, still holding me at arm's length, his eyes scanning my face like he was checking for signs of something that might have been missed. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice full of concern. I shook my head, feeling the tears burn at the corners of my eyes. I didn't want to cry, didn't want to break down, but it was all too much. "I don't know," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know how to feel about any of this." "I'm here for you," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to make sure she pays for this." And for the first time since everything went down, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. Maybe I could get justice. And make it get away from her, and just maybe I could start healing. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Now. Ever. I wasn't the one who had wronged anyone, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The days that followed felt like a blur, a chaotic mess of emotions and actions that I couldn't make sense of. The cops had taken Lisa into custody, but everything felt so unreal. My body was still recovering from the reaction, but my mind, it was stuck replaying the moments over and over, each one more nauseating than the last. I hadn't spoken to her since the ambulance ride. She tried to call, of course, but I ignored every message, every text. I couldn't listen to her excuses, not now. After what she'd done, my brother had stayed with me at the hospital for a few hours. He'd insisted I wasn't going back to the apartment. I didn't argue. There was no way I was going to step foot in that place again, not while she was out there, pretending nothing had happened. The police had told me to get a restraining order, and I was seriously considering it. But first, there were the questions. What would I do next? How would I rebuild from all this? And night, I stayed at my brother's place. The silence was suffocating, but it was better than facing my empty apartment. It was better than being alone with the memories of Lisa's betrayal. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing relentlessly. Lisa. I didn't want to answer, didn't want to hear her voice, but I knew I had to. So I picked up. "Brody," she said, her voice thin, tied with something I couldn't place. "Please listen to me." While barely recognized the woman on the other end of the phone, there was no trace of the woman I had once loved, the woman I thought I was going to marry. Instead, there was just guilt, or maybe fear. Or maybe it was both. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. "You know I didn't mean it, right? I didn't mean to hurt you," she continued, her voice quivering now. "I just wanted you to stop being so controlling." It was a stupid thing to do, but it wasn't. "Stop," I cut her off, my voice low and shaky but firm. "Stop trying to justify what you did. You did it on purpose. You knew what could happen. I was just trying to get you to snap out of it," she said, her tone defensive. "I thought it was all in your head. That's all. I thought you were faking it. I was trying to prove you were being dramatic." I felt my blood boil. "Are you serious right now? You put peanuts in my food. They tried to kill me, Lisa. There's no excuse for that." She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven, and I knew that she was struggling to find the words. But I didn't want to hear them. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. Don't call me again," I said, my voice steely, cutting her off once more. "I don't want to hear it. This is over. Do you understand me?" I hung up before she could say anything else. I had nothing left to say. It was over. It had been over the moment she'd put those peanuts in my food. But the next part, that was when it really hit me. The call didn't end with just Lisa. I had barely set the phone down when my mother called. I didn't even know how she'd gotten the number, but she was frantic, her voice loud and shaking. "Brody, please, what's going on? Why won't you talk to her? You need to understand, she didn't mean it. She's upset. She's been under so much stress, and this is just a misunderstanding." I let her talk, the words bouncing off me like I wasn't even there. I couldn't even respond. How could I explain to her what had happened when she was still blind to it? She didn't mean to hurt you, honey, my mom continued, pleading with me. You have to see that. No, Mom, I said, the words sharp. She meant it. She did it on purpose. I almost died, and you want me to just forgive her and wait for her response. I didn't need to hear it. The guilt, the denial, it all came crashing down on me, but I wasn't going to give in. Not this time. I hung up on her too. Later that afternoon, the cops came to take my statement. They asked about everything, about the buildup of events leading to that moment. They were thorough, asking for specific details of every argument, every snide comment, every time Lisa had brushed off my allergy like it was nothing. And it felt good in a way, to finally say it all out loud. To say the truth. To know that she couldn't lie her way out of this. But as the conversation continued, I started to feel the weight of it all. The police were making things happen. They were gathering evidence. But the realization still gnawed at me. The woman I had loved had been capable of something this dark. Something unforgivable. When they left, I felt numb. But I wasn't crying. Not yet. There was no more pretending anymore. There was only the painful, slow process of trying to put my life back together, piece by piece. The days after the incident felt like a blur, like I was walking through life on autopilot. And to focus on the little things, eating, sleeping, forcing myself to get through the motions. But everything around me, the world I'd known, felt like it had been turned upside down. The worst part was that, despite everything, there was still a nagging part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Why had Lisa done this? What had happened to the woman I thought I knew? Police were investigating, of course, but they said it would take time. Meanwhile, I was left to deal with the aftermath. I couldn't go back to the apartment, not with the memories of that night still fresh in my mind. As faint at my brother's place, but I knew I couldn't live in that limbo forever. The next few days dragged on. Lisa kept calling, but I blocked her. Every text, every voicemail, was just another reminder of what she'd done. I couldn't bring myself to listen to them. Then came the call that changed everything. I was sitting in my brother's living room, scrolling through my phone, when the number flashed on the screen. It wasn't Lisa, but it was her mother. I didn't answer. The phone rang again, and this time, I answered. Brody, listen, she said, her voice frantic, almost pleading. You have to understand, she's been going through so much. She's not herself right now. She's not in her right mind. Please, you have to forgive her. I stared at the screen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Forgive her, I said, my voice low. She tried to kill me. No, her mother said, the words falling out in a rushed jumble. She didn't mean it. She just thought maybe you were faking it. She thought if she could make you see, make you realize you weren't dying, maybe everything would be okay. She never meant to hurt you, Brody. She loves you. I felt the anger rise again, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Love, she loves me. And that's supposed to make it okay. She put peanuts in my food, Lisa. She knew what could happen, and she did it anyway. How is that love? Her mother stayed quiet on the other end, her voice breaking. She's been calling you. She wants to talk. I took a deep breath, trying to control the rush of emotions flooding through me. I don't want to talk to her. I don't ever want to talk to her again. The words felt like a finality, like I was closing a door that I couldn't reopen. But as much as I wanted to hang up, to sever every tie with her, there was something in me that still felt lost. How had it come to this? How had the woman I loved, the woman who promised to take care of me, turned into someone I couldn't recognize? I'll make sure she knows, her mother said softly. But you have to understand, Brody, she's not evil. She's not a bad person. She's just lost. You can't throw everything away for one mistake. The words stung like a slap to the face, but I didn't let them affect me. Not anymore. I hung up without saying goodbye. The silence after the call was deafening. I sat there, my phone still in my hand, staring at the screen. She was still trying to make excuses for Lisa. Still trying to make me feel like it was somehow my fault. But I wasn't gonna let her do that. I couldn't. After what happened, I got up and walked to the window, looking out over the street below. People were going about their lives like everything was normal, like nothing had changed. But my world had changed. And no matter how much her family tried to convince me otherwise, I wasn't going back to that life. Lisa had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Later that night, I spoke to the police again. He had gathered more evidence, and they assured me that things were moving forward. Lisa was still in custody, but they said it could take weeks before anything concrete happened. The court dates were set, but for now, it was just waiting. About her, about how we'd gotten to this point. I thought about the way she'd laughed when I struggled to breathe, when I was dying in front of her eyes. That image haunted me. And I realized something important. Couldn't stay in this fog forever. I couldn't keep living in the past, holding on to a person who no longer existed. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about moving forward, about finding a way to heal. even if it meant letting go of everything I thought I knew. And as it hurt as much as I still wanted answers, I knew that part of my life was over. I had to focus on what came next, even if I didn't know exactly what that was yet. I had to find my way back to me. And I would. The police had come by again to ask more questions. This time, they brought a detective with them. She was younger, maybe in her late 30s. But there was a sharpness to her demeanor that told me she'd seen things I could never imagine. Her eyes were direct, and she didn't waste words. She sat across from me, notebook open, waiting for me to speak. I could feel her attention on me, almost like she was waiting for me to crack under the pressure. I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to break, not now, not after everything that had happened. So he started, she's her voice firm, but let's go over it a kind. Let's go over beginning. From the. I nodded, taking a breath. It wasn't like I had to think about it anymore. And the thing had happened so fast, and the details were burned into my memory. We'd been fighting for a while, I said, my voice steady. I don't know if it was the stress of the wedding or what, but things had changed. Lisa had started making fun of my allergy, dismissing it, acting like it wasn't real. But this was different. I swallowed, trying to push past the lump in my throat. She made spaghetti for dinner that night. In 1,000 times I trusted her. I didn't think for a second that something was wrong. The detective wrote something down, her expression unreadable. I could tell she was listening, really listening, so I continued. After the first few bites, noticed it tasted different. It was sweet almost. But I figured she'd just changed the recipe or something, so I didn't think much of it. I paused, my hands shaking a little. But then my mouth started tingling, my throat felt tight, and I knew right away. I could still feel it, that moment when everything clicked, when my body started betraying me. I could still hear Liz's voice in the background, casual, almost amused. Something's wrong with the food, I'd said, gasping for breath. But she didn't care, she laughed. Is it? Or are you just being dramatic again? I could hear her voice in my head, like it was happening all over again, and it made my stomach churn. I tried to get to my EpiPen. I knew I had to. It was like my hands didn't work anymore. I couldn't move fast enough. My throat was swelling up, I could barely breathe. The detective nodded, her eyes sharp. What did Lisa do? I felt the anger rise in me again. She didn't do anything, she just watched me. She told me I was being dramatic, that I wasn't dying, that it was all in my head, and then, she told me she'd put peanuts in the sauce. The detective's pen stopped moving, and for a second, I thought she might say something, but she didn't. She just let the silence stretch between us. It was like she was waiting for me to go on, to relive that moment again. She said it so casually, like it wasn't a big deal. She said, just a spoonful to prove you're faking. I could barely talk at that point, but I managed to tell her to call 911. I couldn't breathe, I was choking on air, and she still didn't care. She was just standing there. I was getting too worked up, too angry, but I couldn't stop it. I needed to say it. I needed to get it out. When the paramedics got there, I told them what happened. I told them she poisoned me, and that was when she started acting like it wasn't real. She told them I was just anxious. She tried to convince them it wasn't a big deal. The detective let out a slow breath, glancing at her notes. What did you do after? I didn't have to think about that either. I handed them the food sample. I had to prove it. I had to show them what she did. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I could still feel Liz's absence, still hear her voice in my head. But now, there was something else. Something I couldn't shake. The knowledge that I was finally doing what needed to be done. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The detective looked up from her notes and met my eyes. This is serious. I'll have the sample tested, but from what you've told me, it sounds like she deliberately tried to harm you. I nodded, the weight of the words sinking in. I know it sounds unbelievable. But it's the truth. She stood up and tucked her notebook into her bag. We'll be in touch, she said, her voice softer now. But you've done the right thing. We're going to make sure she doesn't get away with this. The door closed behind her, and I was left alone with the silence. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't as oppressive. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't trapped in this nightmare. I was doing the right thing. And it felt like the only thing I could do. The trial was set, and was all moving too fast, and yet, the days felt like they dragged on. The closer we got to the court date, the more I felt like I was losing control. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa's face, her eyes not showing any fear, but something else, a coldness. A certainty that she hadn't done anything wrong, that this was all some misunderstanding. I showed up for the trial with my family at my side, but even they couldn't ease the knot in my stomach. The court was intimidating, cold, sterile, had everything about it screamed finality. The weight of the place hit me, and it made everything feel real. This wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was public. The world would see the truth. Lisa was already sitting at the defendant's table when I walked in. She looked Different. More composed than I expected. There was no trace of the woman I had known. The woman who had laughed when I couldn't breathe. She looked like she could walk out of there with no consequences. Like none of this had ever happened. Her lawyer was by her side, some slick guy in a suit, whispering something to her. She didn't look at me not once. She sat there, staring ahead, like she was waiting for me to make the first move. I couldn't even look at her. The anger rose again, like a tide, and I had to swallow it down. I couldn't let myself lose control. Not here, not now. The prosecutor stood up first, outlining the case. She was professional, efficient, and made it clear that this wasn't just an accident. Lisa had deliberately tried to harm me, to poison me. The medical records, the food sample, the paramedic testimony, it was all there. The evidence was damning. Lisa had confessed to the police. There was no escaping it. I wasn't the only one testifying. The paramedics who had treated me were called next. They were both calm, matter of fact, as they spoke about the severity of the situation, about how I was barely able to breathe, about how the EpiPen had only given me temporary relief. Each spoke about the food sample, about how Lisa had tried to downplay the entire situation, claiming it was just anxiety. The contrast between their professionalism and Lisa's dismissive behavior was glaring. The defense lawyer tried to paint a different picture. He stood up, his voice smooth, calm, and a little too rehearsed. He tried to spin the whole thing into a misunderstanding, saying that I was exaggerating, that I had a history of being paranoid about my allergy, and that Lisa was just trying to help me overcome my irrational fear. His words were poison in their own right, and for a second, I almost believed him. I almost felt like I had done something wrong. But then I remembered the look on Lisa's face when she told me she'd put peanuts in the sauce. I remembered her laughing as I fought for air. And I knew I wasn't wrong. I wasn't exaggerating. I was fighting for my life. The defense lawyer's attempt to discredit me wasn't enough. The jury didn't buy it. They saw the evidence, heard the testimonies, and they saw the truth. Lisa had tried to kill me. There was no other explanation. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath. My hands shook as I gripped the stand, but I knew I had to do this. I had to stand up for myself. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor. I looked down at the jury, trying to keep my voice steady. She knew what could happen. And she did it anyway, I said, my voice a little hoarse. I wasn't just some paranoid person with a fear. My allergy is real. I've linked with it my whole life. And she knew that. She knew what putting peanuts in my food could do to me. I paused, trying to steady myself. I loved her. I trusted her. And she betrayed me. I looked at Lisa then, for the first time in what felt like forever. She didn't look at me. She didn't even flinch. But I could see it in her face, the coldness that had started to creep into her eyes when I was in the air. The complete lack of remorse. The prosecutor came back up, and the trial continued. Lisa's defense tried to poke holes in my story, but it was too late. The evidence was too overwhelming. By the time the closing arguments were made, I felt drained, exhausted, but also strangely calm. I had said what I needed to say. I had fought for my life, for the truth. And now, it was up to the jury. They deliberated for a few hours, and then they came back. I was sitting there, staring straight ahead, when the judge called us all to attention. The room went silent as the jury foreman stood up. We, the jury, find the defendant, Lisa Allerg last name, guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they weren't what I thought they'd be. They weren't a relief, they were just a confirmation. A confirmation that this nightmare was real. That what she had done to me, what she had put me through, wasn't just something I had imagined. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like a winner. I just felt numb, and it survived, but at what cost? What did it mean to win when the person who had hurt you was the one you had trusted most? The judge set the sentencing for later that week. Lisa's family was in the back, staring at me with hatred in their eyes. I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them tear me down. Not anymore. I had done what I had to do, and now it was finally over. The sentencing day came, and I was there, sitting in the courtroom again. I wasn't nervous, wasn't even really angry anymore. I had passed through those emotions, had accepted that this part of my life was over. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Lisa sat across from me, her head lowered. Eyes were red, her face pale, and I couldn't help but notice the way her hands trembled as she clutched her lawyer's notes. She didn't look like the woman I had once been engaged to. She didn't look like someone I could ever imagine sharing a life with. But still it hurt. It hurt to see her like this, even though I knew what she'd done to me. I wasn't sure I would ever stop feeling that ache in my chest, but I had to keep going. The judge entered, and everything fell into place. The bailiff called the proceedings to order. Lisa's family was there, sitting quietly in the back. I saw her mother's eyes flicker to me for a moment before quickly looking away. She didn't want to look at me, didn't want to see the consequences of what her daughter had done. I sat there, not focusing on them, but on the judge. The weight of what was happening pressed down on me. The prosecutor spoke first, laying out the details of the case, the premeditated nature of Lisa's actions. How she had knowingly tried to poison me, disregarding the severity of my allergy. The words hit me in waves. I had said everything I needed to say during the trial, but hearing it all again, laid out like that, and all back, the suffocating panic, the desperate fight for air. When it was time for Lisa's defense to speak, her lawyer stood up, trying to minimize the situation, blaming everything on stress, on a misunderstanding, painting Lisa as someone who had lost control in the moment. But the jury had already spoken, and there was no changing their minds now. Then the judge spoke, her voice calm but firm. The court finds the defendant, Lisa Allerg last name, guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, and defendant's actions were intentional, and they put the victim's life at risk. A life-threatening allergy was knowingly triggered in an attempt to prove a point. She paused, letting the words sink in. I felt the room go still. It wasn't relief I felt, but something else, something colder. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about justice being served. It was about the finality of it all. Lisa's actions, her choices, had consequences. There was no turning back. The judge continued, laying out the sentence. Lisa Allerg last name, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in county jail. The remaining portion of your sentence will be suspended, contingent upon good behavior. You are ordered to undergo anger management counseling, as well as education regarding the severity of food allergies and their impact. The words rang in my ears. 18 months. It could have been worse, and yet, I didn't feel any satisfaction. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt numb. A part of me still couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that someone I loved, someone I trusted, could do something like this to me. Betrayal had been difficult, but it wasn't over. Not really. I would never be able to look at my past the same way again. As the judge wrapped up the proceedings, Lisa's family began to stir in the back of the room. Her mother was talking to someone, her face flushed, her voice rising with emotion. Her father was stone-faced, but I could see the anger in his eyes. They wanted to fight this, to deny what had happened, but there was nothing they could say. Lisa was guilty. The truth was out now, and there was no hiding from it. When I walked out of the courtroom, I didn't feel anything except exhaustion. The bright sunlight outside felt almost too harsh, and I squinted as I stepped into the open air. My brother was waiting for me. And I've been there through every step of this, every painful moment. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was trying to be strong for me. But we both knew this wasn't something that was just going to go away, he said, his voice low, but there was pride in it. You gone through it, you got justice. I nodded, but the words didn't feel right. Justice. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like a chapter of my life that I had to close, even though I didn't want to. The weeks that followed were a blur. Lisa was taken into custody that day, and I didn't hear from her again. Her family tried to contact me, but I ignored their calls. I didn't need their apologies, their attempts to make things right. They didn't understand what had happened. They couldn't. My life slowly returned to something resembling normal, but I would never be the same. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. The fear, the betrayal, it was all too much. I took time off work to clear my head, to figure out what came next. My friends, my coworkers, they were supportive, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was broken inside me. One night, a few weeks later, I was sitting on my brother's couch when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. But then I opened it. It was a text from Lisa's sister, asking if we could talk, saying that Lisa was sorry, that she was trying to make sense of everything. I stared at the message for a while, unsure how to respond, but I knew what the answer was. I wasn't going back. Not to her, not to the past. I had to move forward, even if it meant letting go of everything I thought I knew. I deleted the message, then I turned off my phone and went to bed. This was my life now. It was never going to be the same again, but I was still here. And that had to be enough.